You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. But this week is the second part, just moving to something a little different. It's fun to meet a fellow Long Islander again that has made quite a name for himself and introduce him to you. My guest this week for the second show that we've done is director, producer, and playwright John Blenn. And John has produced over 80 original plays and more than 90 productions with his all-original theater group, Middle Class American Productions. He's taught music business, theater, screenwriting, mass communications, and history at Five Towns College, and has been their Playwright-In Residence as well. He was also a former editor for Good Times Magazine, a writer for Newsday, and was general manager of what was then known as the Westbury Music Fair. Well, welcome to interview number 2, but it's really not an interview. We're just having a conversation. And I know we could do 10 shows, John, easily. You could do that standing on your head.
Well, it's always a pleasure to sit down with somebody who has been through the same experiences, too, and knowing how much experience you've had out here in the entertainment circles, beyond radio, also the clubs and everything else you've done out here. It's always nice to find that common ground and chat about it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I put on my resume that, I'm not really looking for those things, but I was lucky enough to know the music director who was picking the musicians for the Engelman Theater when it opened again. So I played drums for the first show that
Very
they
cool.
did, and that was quite an experience. I was unaware, before I get into it, that in Smokey Joe's Cafe, the band is on the stage.
Right. And they do great work up there, too. That is a premier theater.
Yeah, they do a great job. It was, I guess, a lot of AFTRA people, and they would bust them out from New York. Mm-hmm. So they had some kind of a deal, and some of those actors were incredible. Oh,
absolutely.
My. But then again, Long Island theater in general, I had the chance to do a couple of things. I did Sweet Charity at the Cultural Arts Playhouse, and I read for the part. I didn't even know what I was doing, and somebody put an elbow in my gut and said, This is the lead. You're going to be Charity's boyfriend." I said, "Oh my God!" And memorizing lines and blocking, sure, and all of those things that come in. But I wanted to ask you at the last show: do you put aside time, a certain time during the day when you write?
No, I'm very much a whim guy. I have on the short end written a play that was literally done overnight, a 95-minute play that worked out as being one of the better received and bigger laugh fests that I've done in my career. On the other side of the coin, the very first play that I wrote, which I brought to the Old Arena Players over in Farmingdale, Fred DeFay, who ran the building, said, "Oh, it's a pretty good play, but it needs about a 50 to 60% overhaul." And I said, "Well, I can understand it's flawed, but I don't know if it needs a half overhaul." So I went back and I rewrote it a couple of times, and it eventually made it to stage. But ironically, that one never felt quite right. So, and I would say in general, it usually takes me a couple of weeks from when I start with something. But when the idea hits, I'm one of those muse guys. I'm likely to be up all night long and bang out 30, 35 pages in just a straight streak. And then other ones, when it takes a really long period of time, it usually tells me that it isn't as good an idea as I thought it was, because if I start struggling with it after 10 pages, like, you know what, there's an idea here, there's not a play here yet.
Right. It's kind of like a relationship. If it's not easy, it's probably not right.
I would agree with that completely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's I've heard it said by writers that they feel blessed if they can do a page a day.
Yeah, and I mean everybody has a different approach. I mean, I've produced plays for other people out here. We had new writers series regularly with our theater group, Middle Class American Productions, and there are guys who told me that they had full-length plays that they were working on and tweaking for 7 or 8 or 9 years, and I'm thinking, 9 years of like toying around with the same page, 60 pages, 70 pages. And I mean, everybody's got a different approach and a different way of doing things. But, again, another classic example is like The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman. That particular movie took 10 years to do, had multiple screenwriters, 4 sets of different music writers for it until they settled on the last 2 guys they used. Cast members and directors went in and out. The only person attached to it for the entire decade was Hugh Jackman. And what they came up with, to my mind, is one of the greatest masterpieces in film history.
Right.
But yet it looks like it was a snap, and it's thousands of people that were involved in it making it happen, and so many rewrites and so many tweaks until they got exactly the right music. It's one of the best musical scores I've ever heard in my life, but yet there were 3 other completely different sets of musical scores for that before they settled on the 4th one.
That's amazing.
Yep. And the people they used had written Evan Hansen. That's why they got that look at that point, was they were coming off of something that was a hit. And for my money, The Greatest Showman's a much better musical tale than Evan Hansen's.
Right. To have that kind of focus. And then there's the other thing. It's like you said, over at Arena, they if you were a different person and a different writer, that you may still be writing that play.
Right. And it's funny because I had written a second one almost simultaneously that I took over to the stage, and a guy named Tony George in Merrick. Mm-hmm. And Tony called me back the following day and went, I love this. We're going to do this. Let's put it up immediately. Let's do it in August. And this was March at this point of 1995. And he called me back 2 days later and he went, by the way, do you think you might be able to direct? Because we're a little shorthand on directors. Aren't directed in college, but yeah, I guess I could do it. Sure. I directed a sitcom pilot a couple of years ago, and he's like, great, you direct it. Then he called me up 2 days later and said, you wouldn't happen to have your own acting people, do you? Because we're always struggling to get people in the door. I was like, not thinking anything of it, rather innocently. I went, yeah, sure. If it helps expedite things, I can put together a cast. So I did. We rehearsed that thing for like 5 months, almost every night. And we were rehearsing on sidewalks in front of my wife's graphics company with people walking by us in the middle of the street. We were rehearsing anywhere we could find space to work on it. And all of us had been so far removed from theater. It's like, is 5 months enough time to get this ready? And by the time we got other stuff ready, we were rehearsing some things 2 weeks to get it up and get it ready, because that was all the time window we had coming off of something else. And then you realize, if you got really talented people and you're really ready and everybody's kind of had that script in their possession before you meet, right, you can do it in 2 weeks. You can definitely get ready bashing it every night for 2 weeks. So when we brought it into the stage and put it up, we were very fortunate because he told us they weren't getting phone calls, and they said, don't be brokenhearted because every first-time director always bombs. It's like, oh, we haven't got any tickets to sell. We sold out 3 of your 4 shows. You may have 20 to sell for your Saturday matinee, but everything else is gone. It's like, that's why the phone isn't ringing. Yeah, we spoke to your box office manager and told him we were going to peddle our own tickets, and we would be in touch with him every day on how many we sold. He already knows we're sold out 3 of those 4 days. So, and they came, and we were very fortunate. People absolutely loved what we did. It was called X's and O's, and it was a parody of the court system that was inspired off of actually the O.J. trial at that particular point in time. Has nothing to do with it, but it's like, what if you manipulated a courtroom to sell T-shirts, book deals, and everything else? You didn't care whether you won or not. You just turned it into such a farce. There'd be all kinds of artistic rights to sell on the heels of it, and that's what it was about. And I will never forget Tony Georgian on the opening night of the play. He came running into the dressing room after the show, and his eyes were aglow like a kid on Christmas Eve. This is great. He was like, did you even read the script? And all of a sudden, bong, it went off in my head. It's like, he didn't read it. He didn't cast it. He didn't direct it, because all he did was rent me the space. And if it bombed, it's like, that's not ours. Right. That's none of our actors. That's not our director. Right. But because it hit, all of a sudden it's a good thing. You got to come back. How fast? What else?
What's
do you have?
The next one?
Let's go. And then it actually took, I guess, about 4 years, 3 years for me to actually 2.5 years to get the first play I ever put into Fred's Place in Farmingdale, and ironically, I didn't wind up doing it in his building. I did it in a little theater in Bayshore. And though it played okay, and Peter Chelsea, ironically, was in that cast the one time he worked with me in a play.
Oh, my.
The year-old lead singer from a band Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
And it just never quite played right. It got laughs. It went over okay, but it always felt like the one thing that wasn't pure up against everything else because the process was different.
Right. Wow. Right. I mean, it's, people, if people only knew the sheer terror that that is included in so many of these things. Opening night, the curtain goes up and there's one of your actors is standing in the wings crying because something else happened.
Oh, I've got those tales for you too. The very first night of X's and O's, which was on, it debuted on the third anniversary of my wedding. That was my very first night as a playwright, so I have a double anniversary on August 16th. The first night, the lead actor's mother had a heart attack in the parking lot on the walkout. So she was hospitalized, and overnight, I don't know if we're going to be able to do any more of the run. We don't know if he can do it or not. And he called up the following afternoon and went, they've got her stabilized. They said she's going to be okay. I'll be there tonight. So we did finish it. But the second play we did was a piece written by one of our regular members named Scott Interanti called Tricks of the Trade. And the night before, we did the play at a place called St. Mark's Place out in Comac, which T.C. Cross owned the building. Okay. Her house burned down the night before we opened. And we said, are you still going to open the club up, or are you just going to stay low for a while and get yourself? Yeah. No, I'll open the club. So we opened up with that. The first 5 shows we did, something happened every one of the opening nights, or just about the opening night. The second play I did was called Trailer Park Etiquette, and we did that at the Stage in March of '96. And 2 minutes into the second half, the town of Merrick had a blackout. And the entire room went dark except for 2 emergency lights in the back of the room. And we said, we apologize, but it seems like Merrick and like several towns here on the South Shore are in the midst of a blackout. So you can come back to another show, or we can give you a refund. And the audience started cheering, chanting, finish it. So we literally went into the dressing room, found flashlights, and went out and finished the second half of the play, literally passing it around to each other like around a campfire.
Right.
Doing the full 45 minutes of the second half, and the audience gives us a standing ovation at the end of the night. And then the following day, they turned the power back on again. But that's what happened on my second play. So it's like, this is always going to be interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a book in itself.
Yeah. It absolutely is.
Just story after story.
And it is absolutely true, the old adage of that which does not kill you makes you stronger. It's like after we finished those 3 plays, we're like, nothing's going to slow us down. So we're going to do this no matter what. Yes. If we have to do it in a phone booth or with somebody on fire, we'll finish the play.
It's going to happen.
That's what we'll do.
Well, and I think that's the advantage of experience, knowing the things that you face and say, you know what, that didn't stop us. This didn't stop us.
Yep.
Why should this stop us? Let's do it. That's incredible. But again, theater people, creative people, they always seem to rise to the occasion.
There's a reason they say the show must go on, because if somebody hadn't gone on in the face of that adversity, it wouldn't be a phrase.
Right.
Somebody had to christen that.
Yeah. Again, we could talk about so many things. Long Island now, we're and also comedy. Mm-hmm. You've been, big in the comedy circles. How did that happen?
When I first went over to the Island Ear, they had a lot of advertisers that were doing comedy, and I said, we should really do a regular comedy column. He goes, I think it would be great if you just, went out there and you did tidbits of who's playing where, and we'll run a photo. And I was thinking more in terms of let's go review it. And he looked at me and he said, review it. And I go, well, what is stand-up comedy if not really a 45-minute one-man show?
Right.
There's a very thin distance between John Leguizamo doing a 90-minute story of his life on stage and Broadway, and Dom Irrera coming out to do an hour of his life on a comedy club stage. Mm-hmm. So I started reviewing it, and I found out very quickly that the only other person in the country at that time who was critiquing performances of comedy was a guy who was working for the New York Post, Hank Gallo. And Hank Gallo, very shortly thereafter, took a job as one of the first producers of The Daily Show with Craig Kilborn when Comedy Central came up.
Right.
So that kind of left me as the only person writing those reviews at the time.
Wow.
And I started getting phone calls from all over the country. I'd get somebody going, hey, you don't know me, but I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm coming into New York. I was wondering if you could come review me because I worked on a cruise ship with this guy from your area who mentioned you, etc. So I started to go out and see a lot of different people who came into the area, and then some of my writers became very interested in it when I went back to Good Times, so sent them out and said, okay, let's talk about how we cover it and do it, and then go take a shot at it. So we treated it like you would on any other kind of an art form. We weren't just strictly, let's do a preview interview, let's do actual reviews of what we saw, good, bad, or indifferent. So we were the only guys doing it, and we got a lot of attention for it, and it served us well.
Well, you had the, just to start with, you had the sensibilities of what, what they were attempting to do. Whereas an audience just goes in and sees a performance. They have no idea what his intent, you knew the context.
Well, that's the key. There's a guy by the name of Nick Vermitsky who is a really brilliant classical guitar player out here, also great choral singer. He actually was in kindergarten with my wife. He goes all the way back. There's like all of these intertwining lines of life, if you will. But he was the booking agent for comedy at the brokerage, and I think understood it as much as anybody I knew at that time. Mm-hmm. He would put together a show, and it's like, this guy goes well with this woman who goes well with this guy, so these three acts will be together on a show. You could go to see a show most places, and it's like the first guy is a screaming puppeteer, the second guy is doing bad, musical comedy on a guitar, and the third guy is a monologist who's very low-key and low energy, talking about all the things of his childhood and growing up and dating. But Nick would put together shows where the acts complemented each other. And I said to Nick, I'm going to start reviewing comedy regularly for the Islandeer. Do you mind if I tag along with you? He's like, well, I'm out just about every night of the week, so anytime you want to go. And I was like, yes. He's like, anytime you want to go, yes. When? I go, every night. And I literally went out with him for 30 straight nights for an entire month. Wow. He went to shows in New Jersey to look at people he might be booking for the brokerage. He'd go to Manhattan to see stuff, but I rode along with him, and Nick was brilliant. He'd say, this guy's a monologist, and this was what makes him good, and this is his signature piece, and this is what makes her stand out, and this is why she's the best impressionist in the business right now. And by the time I wrote my first review, I understood the mechanics of it really well, because I didn't think I had any business going out there going, you're funny, you're not funny, without realizing what I'm really looking at.
Yeah, right.
It's like, if somebody goes out there and goes knock knock and does 100 knock knock jokes, like, well, you're not funny because I don't like knock knock jokes. Well, you got to be able to put that to the side going, in terms of knock knock jokes, that's the best knock knock joke in the world, because he's really good at going a different route than other people do. At that point, you're qualified to review it. So I put the time into it to make sure that I didn't embarrass myself or insult an act by not knowing what I was talking about.
Yeah, right. That's key. I mean, critiquing music is tough enough.
Right.
When you're talking about one individual and a guy that's up there and he's naked on the stage. I think that's the beauty of it, is that, you can't bring a prop big enough that you can hide behind.
No, absolutely not. And the thing with music, too, I think in some ways it's a little bit easier to critique than comedy is, because clearly your ear is going to tell you, wow, that guy is not in key. That guy's guitar is not tuned. Wow, that guy is not in time with the other guys. It'll stick out like a sore thumb. But if you're watching comedy, it's like, this is not my idea of humor. Well, that could be the funniest comedian you ever saw. He's just not your cup of tea.
Right.
And that was something I learned very quickly working as a journalist at Good Times is, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. Is it good for what it's supposed to be or not is the question.
There you go.
It's not like, do you like, guys singing, industrial heavy metal in German? Well, I don't really know what he's saying if I can't see the translation on it, but I can hear that they are really good with their power chords, and the guitar player is really fast and precise, and you can review it at that point, but you better have comparative stuff to put it up against. Yeah. And if you haven't experienced it or seen other things like it, you have no business comparing it.
Yeah, right. That's okay, so the comedy scene on Long Island seems pretty hefty. They're doing well.
Yeah, I think that we're in another interesting period right now. I mean, we had a period in the late 80s where everybody just started exploding out of here. Kevin James got a TV series. Ray Romano, though he's from Queens, was a regular Long Island act, playing governors and Brokerage and Chuckles and East Side Comedy. Richie Minervini broke out, in large part because of his relationship with Kevin and being in a lot of Kevin's movies and working with him constantly. But Richie's also done a lot of films. Joey Cola broke out. Eddie Murphy was really the guy at the head of all of that explosion. Jackie Martling broke out. There were guys known as the Magnificent Seven back in the 70s that were like the first wave of like the kings of comedy. Bob Woods is probably one of the lesser known ones to the general public and probably the best known and most respected to the people who were his peers. Murphy is the best known to the general public, but he was out of here fairly quickly because he got on Saturday Night Live and then quickly made that transition to Hollywood, and away Eddie went, and that was the end of the story.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, we've always been a place like that. And then when Kevin James came along, Adam Ferrara broke out, and he wound up on a lot of TV shows, and he's still doing a lot of TV work. And we have continually poured people into the marketplace. What makes Long Island funnier than any place else, or as funny as any place on earth? I think it's probably just the fact that we have a lot of Manhattan sensibilities, but we don't take ourselves quite as seriously. So I think the ability to laugh at the world around you and yourself is slightly better developed here.
Yeah.
Where in Manhattan, you run into a lot of guys that I've seen over the years that are working very hard to be, look how incredibly clever my bits are here.
Right.
We're not judging clever, we're judging the ability to make people laugh. That's what we're out there. How are you as an entertainer?
Yeah.
He's brilliant, but he's not funny. There's a guy named Bill Hicks many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
He's named the Comedian of the Year by Rolling Stone. Bill Hicks used to come out here and tank all the time. He'd bomb. One night he did really well at the Brokerage at a show I was covering. He comes out, he looks at me, and starts banging his head on the counter at the bar. Bang, bang, bang. He's like, it's over. It's over. It's over. And it's like, Bill, they're giving you a standing ovation. He goes, that's the whole point. They're not supposed to do that. You've seen me bomb. When they get it, I'm not clever enough anymore. I was like, I think that's a really self-destructive approach, Bill. And it really bothered him because he used to go into Jimmy's Comedy Alley over in Queens, and he'd do 45 minutes, and like you could hear like crickets, except for a table in the back where the comedians who were choking on their own spit, laughing at it.
Oh, okay.
That one table is laughing their heads off because they get him.
They get him. Yeah.
They're realizing how sophisticated and above the average thought process what he's doing is. But he got so used to bombing and being received like that, it bothered him that if everybody in the room was starting to laugh at him, he was becoming too pop culture and losing his edge.
How many musicians are affected by that same thing? Somebody comes in and says, hey, last week, your number's up, you sold 1 million records.
Right.
Oh, I can't be any good if the masses like me.
Right.
And you just think, wow. But that speaks to, then just do what you like. And if 1 million people happen to like it too, that doesn't make it not good art, or that's a strange one.
Basically, Peter Gabriel having Sledgehammer and having that So album explode for him meant that everything he did before that was received kind of lukewarm, he could do that the rest of his life and never worry about it because he had that one album that would justify him always having a record deal and always working at some company somewhere along the line. His hardcore fans were always going to follow him, but it put him on the radio and raised consciousness of him. You have that one massive runaway hit album, you can do whatever you want the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Look at Bowie. Bowie spent his entire career. You never knew what you were going to get with him. It was always buyer beware on every album. It's like, this sounds nothing like the last album. Right. And he was a true artist.
Does that still happen?
From time to time, you run into artists like that I think that still happens with. Yeah, I think that there are always groups out there that are going to test the envelope and experiment. But again, it depends on what you do. I think that somebody like Pink, in a lot of ways, has experimented as best she can with the scope of her style of music.
Right.
I think a lot of her later stuff is much more ballad-heavy and a bit deeper than the party stuff that she kind of exploded onto the scene with.
Yeah.
But I think she's a tremendous tremendous artist and tremendous voice as well. But the fact that she has an I'm Coming Up and a few hits like that now she can basically write her own ticket and do whatever she wants.
Yeah.
She's going to be successful now because she's defined herself, as opposed to she's writing the songs that people are looking for.
Right.
And that's rarefied air when you can do that.
Yeah. Very interesting. Wow. So anyway, I can think my mind is racing. I'm in all directions. Well, let's talk about where you think entertainment in general is going on with Long Island.
Well, it's been interesting because I've seen a lot of change with the students that I've taught at Five Towns College over the last couple of decades. I mean, right now, the majority of them are very concerned with we've got to get that new single up on the internet as soon as possible. They're not thinking about, do we have a live show? They're not thinking about, are we ever going to tour? They're just thinking about, is there a downloadable song up there that people can hear and buy immediately?
Right.
But thinking in terms of that, every time you get 3 cents from Spotify or 2 cents or whatever,
0.003.
Right.
That's 3,000ths.
Yeah,
of a penny.
Right? So what are you going to do? Please don't spend that all in one place when you get the check for it. But that's their focus, is to get to the marketplace and get noticed like that, as opposed to some bands like, well, we're working on a stage show, we're working on an overall look. But you see those in more and more rare circumstances than ever now. It's not what's on their minds to do.
Yeah.
And you go out to see the clubs on Long Island, the musicians in general are getting older and older and older because it's the guys who have been great players for 20, 30, 40 years, know exactly what they're doing. Like, you know what the public wants to see? They want to see a really good In Excess tribute, because In Excess doesn't tour anymore.
Right.
And they've got 30 legitimate hits, so let's do an In Excess thing. So out they go. Or, hey, there's no more Jerry anymore, and there's no more most of those guys. And every once in a while they'll do Dead and Company, but let's go do a Grateful Dead tribute. And that audience is always going to go looking for Grateful Dead. Right. So they continue to work. They create a sound in these tributes of these bands that, close your eyes, you can't really tell them apart. They're that good. Yeah. And that's why they're working so much.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we have blown past the point with, well, let's put this great new band in here on Tuesday nights and let it ride for 6 weeks and see if they can build an audience.
Right.
Because we're much too fickle and we're moving much too fast. Yeah. If it doesn't hit immediately, it's on to the next thing. And unfortunately, when they lose faith in you as a musical artist, it's on to the next thing, and they're not looking back either. So it creates an environment where you have to be very, very focused and very effective on contact. There's really very little room for error.
Yeah.
And again, every now and then, I mean, most of these bands that are playing out here right now trying to do new things, Brooklyn is like the place they go. They have come to the conclusion that Brooklyn is where all the open minds are. It's not even Manhattan anymore. It's like, let's go play clubs in Brooklyn. Yeah. And you don't see much of it on Long Island because other than Mr. Beery's and a couple of other smaller places, there's not a whole lot of places welcoming it with open arms.
Yeah, I've noticed that. We play Brooklyn a lot. We played the city a bunch. And those folks in those situations will go out and look for new music. Right. You don't see that on Long Island much. You know, people who are coming to see a new band usually dragged by somebody they know. Right. You know, come on, you got to see these guys, you know, and come out. I always applaud Mr. Beery's for doing what he does. And there are a lot of good bands that nobody's ever going to hear. Yep. You know, and to me, that's really sad. You know, they worked hard. They got good shows. They're not skating by or, you know, sneaking past, and they're really presenting where. And I've seen bands for, you know, again, 40. I'm actually older than you, John. I have quite a few years on you, and I've seen, you know. So I go and watch them, and they blow me away. And these could be young kids, right. You know. That whole thing, it seems to have kind of changed. It used to be you're looking for a record company, right? And now that's almost no. Right. Why would you want? You're just gonna share your profits with them if you have any. Yeah, they're going to sell more CDs in general out of the back of their station wagon. So, wow, we're going to have to do this again, John.
kidding, Bill. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, man. Well, anyway, my guest today has been director and producer, playwright John Blenn. John, again, thank you so much for taking the time. And maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll get together and do 5 more shows. We can put them in the can.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Great. So the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're right here every Friday at 3 p.m. right on the radio on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.